Breathe. And stay with me. This one is going to hit hard. There is a specific kind of pain that doesn't scream. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't leave a bruise you can point to. Just sits there. In your chest. Like something was removed and never replaced. I know that pain. I've lived with it for 6 years. And for 6 years I stayed silent, because the people I loved most needed me to. But I'm done being quiet now. My name is Emily. I am 34 years old. And 6 years ago, my younger sister Sophie and the man I was going to marry did something that restructured the entire architecture of who I was. I'm not here to make you feel sorry for me. I'm here because maybe, just maybe, you've had someone look you in the eyes and choose to destroy you anyway. And maybe you've never heard anybody say out loud what that actually does to a person. So let me say it. Let me say all of it. If this sounds like something you need to hear, subscribe right now. Hit the bell. And stay with me for the whole thing. I promise you by the end we'll both feel something close to free. I met Daniel when I was 20 years old. Junior year of college. He was in my sociology class. He sat 3 rows behind me and always asked questions that made the professor smile. The kind of questions that made you think he had read more than just the assigned chapters. He was charming in that specific, quiet way that's more dangerous than loud charm. He didn't need the whole room. He only needed you to feel like the whole room was yours. And for years, for years he made me feel exactly that. We dated for 4 years before he proposed. 4 years of Sunday mornings and late-night talks and holidays with both our families and all the slow, ordinary moments that build something real. At least I thought they were real. When he proposed, down on one knee in the living room of the apartment we were sharing, with my mother watching through a video call and crying so hard she couldn't see the screen, I said yes before he even finished the question. Of course I did. He was Daniel. He was my person. He was the future I had already started building inside my head. The house, the kids, the Thanksgiving tables that went on forever because both our families would finally just become one family. My sister Sophie was my maid of honor. We'd always been close, even though she was 3 years younger. She was the louder one. Bright, impulsive, always the life of every room she walked into. Where I was cautious, Sophie was all gas and no brake. I loved that about her. I trusted that about her. That was my mistake. It was a Friday in September, 3 months before the wedding. Our parents had a lake house about an hour outside the city. Daniel was supposed to be at a work dinner. I had a headache and went to the lake house early to rest. Had a key. Nobody was supposed to be there. I drove up in the dark. The porch light was on. I remember thinking, somebody must have left the light on by accident. I walked in through the side door, the one that went straight into the den. And I stopped. Sophie was sitting on the couch. She was wearing a blue cardigan and jeans and her hair was down. She was laughing at something, that specific laugh she has, the one that fills a room. And around her neck. Around her neck was my engagement necklace. The one Daniel had given me the day he proposed. A thin gold chain with a small diamond pendant. The kind of thing you only take off to sleep. I had taken it off that afternoon when my neck started aching. I'd left it on the bathroom counter. Sophie hadn't come over that day. Daniel had. And then I heard him. His voice from the kitchen. "You okay?" he called out. "Found the good wine." He walked around the corner and stopped dead. We stood there, all 3 of us, in a silence that went on way too long. Sophie's hand flew to the necklace like she could hide it. Daniel's face went white. And I looked at both of them and understood everything in a single second, even as every part of me tried to refuse that understanding. I said one word. "How long?" Sophie opened her mouth. Daniel said, "Emily." I said it again. Quieter this time. "How long?" Sophie looked at the floor. That was all the answer I needed. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I picked up my bag, walked back out the side door, drove for 40 minutes, and then pulled over on a dark county road and sat in the car for 2 hours. Completely unable to move. Within 2 weeks, Daniel called off the wedding. No dramatic speech. No explanation beyond what I already knew. He sent a text, saying he was deeply sorry and that he needed to figure things out. Text. After 4 years and a ring on my finger. Text. I didn't respond. What would I have said? A month later, Sophie called me. She was crying from the very first word. She said she hadn't meant for any of it to happen. She said it was complicated. She said she and Daniel had feelings for each other and she didn't know how to tell me and she was so sorry. Hung up. 3 weeks after that, my mother called. Sophie was pregnant. I don't have a word for what that moment felt like. I've tried for years. There isn't one. It wasn't just the betrayal. It wasn't just the loss. It was the permanence of it. This wasn't something we could someday quietly set aside and pretend didn't happen. There was going to be a baby. The baby was going to make Sophie and Daniel permanent. It was going to make this real in a way nothing could ever undo. My mother, on that same call, said something I will never forget. She said, "Emily, I know this is hard for you, but a baby changes everything. We have to support Sophie right now." She said we. Like I was automatically included. Like I was just going to nod and absorb all of it and rearrange my grief around their convenience. I said, "Don't ever call me again about this." And I meant it. In the weeks that followed, I discovered what it means for a family to quietly, collectively decide that something is more important than you. It's never one big moment. It's 100 small ones. My father calling to say he hoped I'd be at Christmas, and that Sophie and Daniel would also be there, and that he hoped we could all be adults. My aunt texting me a Bible verse about forgiveness with zero context. My cousin DMing me to say Sophie really needs her sister right now. Nobody asked what I needed. Nobody called to say, "Emily, what happened to you was wrong. We see that. We're sorry." That's the part that broke me more than the original betrayal. That I could have survived Daniel and Sophie. What I couldn't survive was my whole family forming a slow, comfortable consensus that I was the problem for not getting over it fast enough. I skipped Christmas, then Easter, then my parents' anniversary party. Every time I didn't show up, someone let me know, gently, always gently, how hard it was for everyone else that I was choosing to stay away. Choosing. As if I'd just decided, arbitrarily, to be difficult. I stopped answering most of the calls. I stopped explaining myself. And eventually, I stopped living in a city where I might run into any of them. I packed my apartment in 11 days. I took a job in another city, a marketing role I'd been considering for months but hadn't pulled the trigger on because Daniel didn't want to relocate. Pulled the trigger. I moved on a Tuesday. Nobody helped me. I hired movers, drove my own car, and checked into a hotel for 2 weeks while I found an apartment. The first month was the worst of my life. Not because of the practical stuff I'm organized. Can handle logistics. It was the silence that nearly undid me. When you cut people off, there's a version of the grief that other people don't tell you about. It's not just missing them. It's missing the version of yourself that existed when they were still safe. The person who still believed certain things. The person who hadn't yet learned that betrayal can come from the people who are supposed to be the last ones to do it. I went to therapy. Not because someone told me to. Because I got to a point where I could feel that I was either going to get help or I was going to become someone I didn't want to be. My therapist, Dr. Layla, said something in our third session that I wrote on a sticky note and kept on my bathroom mirror for 2 years. You didn't lose a man. You lost an illusion of safety. That's a much bigger loss. And a much more important thing to mourn correctly. I mourned it correctly. Took almost 3 years. But I did it. By the time I was 32 years old, I barely recognized the Emily who had stood frozen in that lake house doorway. I had built something. My marketing career was going better than I ever imagined. I'd moved from the agency side to an in-house director role at a tech company. Had a team. I had an apartment that actually looked like somewhere I'd chosen to live. Not just somewhere I'd landed. I had a small group of friends who knew my actual story. The real one, not the softened version. I had routines that made me feel like myself. Saturday morning runs, Sunday cooking, bad reality TV on Thursday nights because I'd earned it. I was, for the first time in a long time, genuinely okay. And then I met Ryan. Ryan came into my life at a work mixer that I almost didn't attend. My coworker had guilt-tripped me into going, and I'd spent the first 45 minutes standing near the appetizer table looking for an excuse to leave. And then this guy, tall, kind of awkward in the best possible way, holding a drink he clearly didn't want, caught my eye across the room and visibly mouthed the words, "This is terrible." I laughed so hard I choked on my water. That was Ryan. He was an architect. Quiet in public, wildly funny in private. The kind of person who remembered small things. What you ordered the first time you went to a restaurant together, the name of your childhood dog, the fact that you hate cilantro even when it's barely detectable. He was patient. He was steady. He asked me real questions and actually waited for the real answers. I told him about Daniel and Sophie on our 4th date. Not everything. Just enough. He listened the entire time without trying to fix it or redirect or minimize. And when I was done, he just said, "That was a terrible thing to go through. I'm glad you made it to the other side." That was it. No dramatic speech. No promises. Just "I see you. You survived it. I'm glad you're here." I went home that night and cried. Not from sadness, but from the strange, disorienting relief of being seen correctly. Within a year we were serious. Really serious. And for the first time since I was 24 years old, I let myself think about a future that involved someone else. It was a Thursday evening, a perfectly normal Thursday, when my phone rang and my mother's name appeared on the screen. I hadn't spoken to my mother in nearly 8 months. We'd had sporadic contact over the 6 years, terse texts, brief holiday calls, nothing that went deep. But 8 months of silence was even longer than usual. I stared at the phone for a long time. Ryan looked up from across the couch. "You okay?" "My mother," I said. He just nodded and went back to his book, leaving the decision entirely to me. Answered. "Emily." Her voice sounded different. "Tired. Sophie needs to see you. Something is. It's serious." "What kind of serious?" "It's not something I can explain over the phone. Can you come home for a weekend?" I felt the old familiar tightening in my chest. The one that had lived there for years. The one that appeared whenever any member of my family implied that my presence was required for Sophie's benefit. "If Sophie needs help," I said carefully, "she can call me herself." "She won't. She's too ashamed." Emily, their marriage. Things have been very bad. I didn't know how bad until recently. "I think you need to know some things." Almost said no. I was so close to saying no. But something in my mother's voice, not manipulation this time, just exhaustion, something genuinely heavy, made me pause. "I'll drive down Saturday morning," I said. "I'm not staying overnight." "Okay," she said. "Okay, Emily. Thank you." I hung up and sat very still. Ryan came and sat beside me without asking. I leaned into him and stayed there. I drove down alone on Saturday morning. 2.5 hours of just the road and the radio and my own thoughts bouncing off each other. My parents' house looked exactly the same. The garden was a little overgrown. The paint on the shutters was starting to peel. It looked like a house where nobody had had enough energy lately to take care of the details. My mother answered the door before I finished knocking. She'd aged. The way people age when they've been worrying about something for a long time. She hugged me. Let her. Sophie was already sitting in the living room. She was thin in a way she hadn't been before. There were shadows under her eyes that looked permanent. The bright, loud energy she'd always carried, the energy that used to fill every room, was completely gone. She looked like someone who'd been running on empty for years and had finally just stopped running. Her daughter, Daniel's daughter, was playing in the next room. She was 5 years old. I could hear her talking to a toy. Sophie looked at me and immediately started crying. "Emily, I know I don't deserve." "Just talk," I said. My voice came out even. I hadn't planned that. She talked for almost 2 hours. The early years of their marriage had been fine, she said. Not perfect, but fine. She'd convinced herself she was happy. She'd been so deep in defending the decision she'd made that she couldn't see it clearly. But Daniel had started pulling away within the 2nd year. Cold for weeks, then warm and apologetic, then cold again. controlling in quiet ways. Who she saw, how she spent money, what she posted online. And then the cheating started. She found out about the first one when their daughter was 18 months old. "He told me I made him do it," Sophie said, her hands twisted in her lap. "He said I was too anxious, too clingy, that I didn't understand him. And I believed him, Emily. I actually believed him." She looked up at me, finally, with something raw and afraid in her eyes. "He was always talking about you. Even in the beginning. Not warmly. Just like he had something to prove. Like you were the measuring stick, and everything in his life was about being better than what he left behind." I sat with what Sophie said for a long time. Daniel had never loved Sophie. He had wanted to win. Some people love being chosen. And some people, the dangerous kind, love making someone else feel unchosen. Daniel was the second type. He hadn't pursued Sophie because he fell for her. He'd pursued Sophie because she was mine, and taking her was the fastest way to remind me that everything I had could be removed. I'd spent years trying to understand what had happened, what I had done wrong, how I hadn't seen it. And sitting there in my parents' living room, looking at my sister who was barely holding together, I finally understood. I hadn't done anything wrong. He was broken before I ever met him. Sophie just hadn't realized what she'd inherited. "Does he know you reached out to me?" I asked. Sophie shook her head immediately. "He can't know. When your name comes up, he gets this look. Like something tightens in him." "You said things have been bad," I said. "Are you safe?" She hesitated too long before answering. That was its own answer. "You need to get out," I said. Not unkindly. Just clearly. "I know," she whispered. And then my mother, who had been quiet for most of this, said something I hadn't expected. "There's something else," my mother said. She looked at me carefully. "Something about Ryan." My mother pulled out her phone. She showed me a screenshot, a LinkedIn message. Sent to Ryan. From Daniel. It was polished. Professional sounding. It said Daniel was an old acquaintance from Emily's past who was concerned about some things from her history. That he'd witnessed some behaviors, some patterns that Ryan should probably be aware of. That he was happy to talk privately if Ryan wanted to reach out. My vision went very still. "How do you have this?" I asked. "Sophie found it on his computer," my mother said. "He'd been preparing it for weeks. We don't know if he actually sent it." I took out my own phone and called Ryan immediately. "Did anyone message you on LinkedIn recently?" I asked before he even said hello. "About me?" "Yeah," he said slowly. "About 2 weeks ago. I wasn't sure whether to tell you. I didn't respond to it, I just blocked the account and reported it. I figured it was some kind of spam or..." His voice went careful. "Who was it?" I closed my eyes for a moment. "It was Daniel," I said. Ryan was quiet for a long moment. Then calmly, "And this is why I loved him," he just said. "Well, that was a mistake on his part. That was when I made my decision. I had spent 6 years staying quiet to protect my own peace. I had moved cities, cut contact, rebuilt my life, found someone who made me feel safe. And Daniel was still, 6 years later, trying to reach into my world and destroy something. Not this time. My parents' 30th anniversary party was scheduled for 2 weeks later. It had been planned for months. The whole family was coming. Aunts, uncles, cousins, family friends. Daniel was coming too. Course he was. He still showed up to everything, still smiled in every family photo, still acted like a man who had nothing to apologize for. My mother asked if I would come. For a moment I thought about saying no. Going back to my life, to Ryan, to the peace I'd earned. Letting Daniel continue to exist as Sophie's problem, as my family's blind spot, as the person who had broken everything and never once had to stand in front of it. But I thought about Ryan getting that message. I thought about how careful Daniel had been, how he'd calculated exactly the right professional tone, exactly the right story to tell, how much he'd enjoyed imagining Ryan pulling away from me, how he'd probably waited months just for the right moment. And I thought about Sophie's daughter playing in the next room, 5 years old, growing up in that house. "I'll be there," I told my mother. I drove home. I told Ryan everything. He listened. He didn't panic. He didn't try to talk me out of anything. He just looked at me and said, "What do you need from me for this?" "Come with me," I said. "Done," he said. That night I went through 2 years of saved messages. A voice recording from a phone call I'd kept purely because something had felt off at the time, and screenshots that my best friend had preserved on my behalf in the weeks after the original betrayal. I organized everything. I wasn't angry while I did it. I was very, very calm. The anniversary party was held in my parents' backyard. String lights, catered spread. 30-something people milling around with drinks, catching up, taking photos. I arrived with Ryan. Several people looked surprised to see me. Several people looked pleased. And one person, Daniel, spotted me from across the yard and let a smile settle across his face. The confident, easy smile of a man who believed he was in control of the room. He came over within minutes. Of course he did. He extended his hand to Ryan first, performing graciousness for whoever might be watching, and said, "You must be the new boyfriend. Daniel, good to meet you." Ryan took his hand briefly, said nothing, and looked away. Daniel turned to me. "Emily, it's good to see you. Really. I hope we can all just..." "Daniel," I said. "I have something I'd like to share with the family." Something shifted in his expression. Just a flicker. A recalculation. "This isn't the time." "Actually," I said, "I think it's exactly the time." I had printed everything. Physical copies. And I'd sent a digital folder to 3 people in that yard before we arrived. People I trusted, people who would understand what they were looking at. I didn't shout. I didn't break down. I didn't perform anything. I simply started talking. I told the story. The whole story. The lake house, the necklace, the text that canceled our engagement, Sophie's pregnancy, the years of silence, Sophie's confession about the emotional abuse, about the controlling behavior, about the cheating. And then I got to the LinkedIn message. I read it out loud, word for word. And then I said, "Daniel sent this to my partner 2 weeks ago, after 6 years, because he still needed to feel like he could take something from me." The yard was very quiet. Daniel's face had gone through 4 different expressions in 30 seconds. He landed on fury. "You're insane," he said. "You've always been. This is exactly the behavior I told people about. You've never been able to let this go." "These are your voice messages," I said, holding up a printed transcript. "This is your handwriting on a note my sister kept. And this," I held up the digital folder open on my phone screen, "is a complete record that I'm happy to share with anyone here who'd like to see it. You can't just, you don't have the right to." "Daniel." My father's voice. Quiet. Like he'd finally heard something he couldn't unhear. Daniel stopped talking. Sophie hadn't known I was going to do this. She was standing near the back of the yard with some cousins when I started speaking. By the end she was crying. The silent, collapsed kind of crying that comes from holding something too long. An aunt walked over and put her arm around Sophie. Not around Daniel. Around Sophie. That was new. Daniel left the party. Not dramatically. He wasn't given the chance to be dramatic. My father simply said quietly to his face, "You should go." And Daniel, for possibly the first time in his life, had no play left to make. He walked to his car and he left. My mother sat down on a garden chair and didn't get up for a while. My aunt brought her a glass of water. My father stood near the hedge for a long time, looking at nothing in particular. I didn't feel victorious. I want to be honest about that. Standing in my parents' backyard, holding 6 years of documented truth, I didn't feel like I'd won anything. I felt the specific exhaustion of someone who has been carrying something very heavy for a very long time and has finally been allowed to set it down. Relief, I think, is the closest word. Ryan stood beside me the entire time. He didn't intervene. He didn't try to fix anything. He just stood there, solid and quiet and completely present. Later he would say, "You didn't need me to do anything. You had it." And for the first time in 6 years, I believed that was actually true. I stayed for an hour after Daniel left. I talked to my parents. For real, maybe for the first time in years. My father apologized. Not with a lot of words. But the ones he used were the right ones. We made you pay for a mistake that was never yours. I'm sorry, Emily. My mother said. We should have believed you 6 years ago. I looked at her. There was a time, for years, when those words were the only thing I wanted to hear. I used to rehearse it. Used to imagine what it would feel like if someone in my family finally said it. I thought it would be everything. I thought it would fix the whole thing. But standing there at 34, with Ryan beside me and 6 years of a rebuilt life behind me, I realized it wasn't everything. It was something. But it wasn't everything. Because here's what I'd learned. The validation I needed at 28, I'd had to find myself. In therapy rooms and long runs and honest conversations and the work of slowly learning to trust my own perception again. Nobody could hand that to me. Not even an apology delivered 6 years later. I said, "No, you should have respected me." My mother blinked. "Believing me would have been nice," I said. "But respecting me, respecting that I had the right to be hurt, the right to not perform forgiveness on your schedule, the right to walk away when staying was destroying me, that's what I needed. And I'm okay that you understand that now. I just needed you to understand it." My mother didn't say anything. Neither did I. I hugged her. Genuinely, not performed. Because I'm not made of stone. And because understanding that someone failed you doesn't mean you stop loving them. It just means you stop letting the failure define your life. Ryan and I left just before sunset. He held my hand the whole drive home. I watched the city come back into view through the windshield. The skyline, the lights, the ordinary beautiful shape of my actual life. And felt something settle in me that had been loose for a very long time. The story of what Sophie and Daniel did to me isn't the story of how I was destroyed. It's the story of how I didn't let it destroy me. There's a difference. Took me 6 years to fully understand it. The day you stop needing the person who hurt you to admit what they did is the day you finally get your power back. Not because they confessed. Not because they suffered. But because you stopped organizing your healing around their timeline. I'm done being organized around anyone else's timeline. That's the end of the story. Or maybe it's just the beginning of a better one. If you made it to the end of this, thank you. I mean that. Stories like Emily's don't go viral because they're dramatic. They go viral because they're real. Because somewhere in this, you recognized someone you know. Maybe you recognized yourself. If you did, I want to hear from you. Drop it in the comments. Just one line. That's all. I've been Emily. Or I've been Sophie. Or even just I needed this today. And if you're not subscribed yet, hit that button. New stories post every week. You belong here. Before you click away, tell me, what's the bravest thing you've ever done to protect your own peace?